So I think we all remember the infamous E3 2013 when Microsoft showed off their brand new system with the Xbox One, and then like the next day got ran over completely by Sony by doing something as basic as handing someone else a PlayStation 4 game. Microsoft certainly painted their way into a corner with heavy uses of DRM and the Kinect sensor. But there was actually another system that was unveiled at E3 2013 that most people have completely forgotten about. It's an Xbox 360, and I thought we'd take a look at that here today. Guys, if you enjoy these videos, make sure that like button helps that a ton, and if you're new here to the Spawn Wave channel, make sure you subscribe down below. So even the time leading up to E3 that year, Microsoft had to do a lot of backtracking on original things they were planning, like, for example, the Kinect needing to be plugged in. That was a requirement, and a lot of that came down to concerns around spying basically through the Kinect. Even though you were able to turn it off, the sensor, in the settings, it was still something people were like, well, I mean, what's stopping the system or Microsoft from turning it back on if they do need to look at you through the Kinect for whatever reason? And that year, E3 2013 was full of a bunch of famous sound bites, like Don Mattrick, of course, telling people if you don't like it, there's an Xbox 360 out there for you.
And fortunately, we have a product for people who aren't able to get some form of connectivity. It's called Xbox 360.
Right. So stick with 360. That's your message if you don't, like it?
If you have zero access to the internet, that is an offline device.
And it makes sense why he would be pushing the Xbox 360, considering they just introduced a brand new model that day. That's right, at E3, they had this go on sale at a couple of different prices. We had a $200 bundle and then a $300 bundle, and this was the Xbox 360e. I actually got this one used pretty recently, and it's about the condition I figured it would be in, considering this was mostly geared, I think, towards kids or families who weren't looking to get the Xbox One experience at the time, which again was mostly focused towards online connection, DRM, all of this. And you know what, the more I think about it with what Don Mattrick was saying back then in 2013, he might have just been early, because now we have most games reliant on an online connection. We have subscription services. DRM is just implanted right now into gaming. So maybe if Don Mattrick came around now, he would have fit right in. Anyway, let's take a quick look at the Xbox 360e. It has that frustrating bit to it where there is just glossy plastic all around the side. The thing with the original Xbox 360 Slim, they had that as all glossy, and that was the worst. And then they had like a matte finish come out that was much more preferred as the 4GB model. And then they went back to like this half and half where like the top half is glossy, which, I mean, you can see just scratched up to no end, whereas the matte side looks much better in the light. But I mean, it wraps all the way around, even on the front faceplate. Which brings us to one of the biggest changes that they did, going from that 360S to the 360e, physical buttons again. Remember, we went to the touch sensors for the Xbox 360S, which actually had some issues that were introduced when it came to the touch sensors not functioning correctly, sometimes even opening the game completely on its own with the disk tray getting kicked out. Speaking of which, this was technically the last Xbox created that had a disk drive that would kick out. After this, it was all slot loading with the Xbox One and now the Xbox Series. On this side, we do have our Xbox logo, different finish from what was a nice clean glossy plastic underneath. And then we have our vents for the fan, which does sit right on top of the heatsink on top of the APU. The back is where things really change up from that Xbox 360 Slim. We have one less USB port on the system. Here we have 4 USB ports, 2 on the back, 2 on the front, which is 1 less than the 5 on that Xbox 360S. We also have eliminated completely the AV port on the back. Remember the very large port that sits generally like right around where the HDMI port is? In this case, they have like one single plug here for AV that then converts into like the composite, or I think they even have one for component. We also have the Kinect sensor plug-in, and we have our Ethernet port. They did change up the power plug. I think a lot of this just has to do with them trying to save money any way possible for this system. It was gonna, like I said, run alongside a more expensive, more premium Xbox One that was $500. This coming in $200, the cheapest. They had to start removing and changing things up in manufacturing to make that work. So this being a single barrel, even though it seems to use the same amount of power as that Xbox 360S, I'm sure even the little things like that managed to save them at least a couple pennies at manufacturing per system. And then on the bottom here, we do have a little door, much like the 360S, where you can drop a removable hard drive in here in that specific plastic that they have set up. And we had a lot of third-party hard drives just get out there on Amazon and all of that, but for the most part, you either got a 4 GB system that had this completely empty, or you had the 250 GB model that did have a drive installed. And from what I remember, both bundles came with the Kinect, but I guess they expect you to plug in the Kinect and just navigate around with that, which wasn't the greatest experience from what I remember back then. You would like kind of Minority Report a way around, but it was pretty laggy and it didn't always respond correctly. It's just better to use a controller. So we'll go ahead and open it up now. And to be honest, I haven't had to open many of these because it came out right when the Xbox One was building up its hype cycle and marketing heading into that holiday. So I feel like for the most part, a lot of people just waited to spend their $200 or $300 on an Xbox One, or maybe even moving over to the PlayStation 4 since Sony had a pretty good showing that year. The only things I've really had to do to this are when like the disk drive would get stuck or just something got messed up on the faceplate. Fortunately though, this one's pretty easy to take apart, and once again, that comes down to them cutting costs around things like screws and even resorting to plastic tabs almost all the way around to hold it together. So we have the bottom that comes off, then the top, we have our Wi-Fi card here. We have a warranty sticker on the back that we have to cut. We have one tab here that has to be opened up, one on this side, one on the opposite side of this warranty sticker here. So you can kind of get to this one through here, then you sort of have to press right around this side to get that to pop up. The thing that was really weird about this Xbox 360 model in particular has to do with that front faceplate and kind of the disk drive faceplate. The front part of it where it would only pop out has like that one spot on the front, might be silver or might be matte black, kind of match the front. In this one, it actually like overlaps. So you have to remove this to get the faceplate off just because of this one piece of plastic here. It's kind of strange. The only thing I think of is they wanted it to sort of look like all one piece because they actually modeled this similar to the Xbox One. That was one of their big like talking points for like the 60 seconds it was up there on stage. Otherwise though, the faceplate just plugs in right down here. So it is nice if you damage the faceplate in some way. The whole thing is modular and it's not too bad to get to. Otherwise though, this is the majority of the screws for the entire Xbox 360. We had one screw here for the Wi-Fi card, but otherwise it's been a lot of plastic clips. And as I said, this system was certainly designed when it comes to cost. You know, I do wonder if Microsoft's plan for the Xbox One worked. Basically, people moved on from the idea of DRM being a problem at that time. Maybe Sony didn't push it as hard as they did, which, I mean, they really took advantage of the bad press that Microsoft was getting and really the pushback from gamers. And I mean, they twisted the knife pretty bad at E3. But if it didn't go that way, everything at least kind of blew over for them and they were able to release the Xbox One with everything they had in mind from the drawing board. If the Xbox 360 actually would have stuck around for a while in the idea of, oh, that's the offline system, and the Xbox One would be the system that you would buy if you wanted to be, you know, tapped in, connected at all times. And I mean, if you really think about it, they redesigned it to match up more so with the aesthetic of the Xbox One and the fact that they were probably making decent money at this point on this Xbox 360, maybe it also would have offset the costs that they were incurring from that Xbox One. All right, all the screws out, and you know, it doesn't look too bad. Usually you'll get like bits and pieces of food or crumbs or something where the fan is, just because it's, I mean, it's technically open completely. They have like a little, almost like a little grated piece here, I guess, to act kind of like a filter, but not too bad overall from what I have seen before. Otherwise though, everything's kind of just floating around in here. Even the case screws that I removed, the stuff in here relies on that to kind of keep planted. All right, and there we have our board. It's pretty much the same as the Xbox 360S. In fact, the real differences are that they mostly just remove stuff. I mean, they marketed this entire thing as being slimmer, sleeker, quieter, just less capable, really, is kind of the way I looked at it. I mean, it was small things like they removed the optical port on the back here, so the only way to get surround sound is through HDMI, and they knocked off one of the USB ports along with the large AV brick. And it's not like that's new or anything to games. A lot of times these companies will revise systems, make them cheaper, and then market them as better replacements for the system you already have. It's just kind of the way it works. Well, we got our trusty X-clamp off of here, and we can get a quick look at the chip here, which this one was manufactured in 2013, so it is the same chip used in the Xbox 360S. It wasn't until I believe the following year when they introduced a new chip and board, and you can tell because it won't have like this metal heat spreader on it. It'll just be this single chip here with a die in the middle. And with that new chip, they also brought in different security measures, so that's usually the board people tend to avoid if they're looking to get into the soft mod and homebrewing scene with these. And I think that's pretty much it for the Xbox 360E. It was basically an Xbox 360S that they dressed up to look more like an Xbox One, took off a few features like a USB port and the AV port on the back, but they did work to mostly cut costs down. In fact, if you take a look at this, I mean, these are all the screws that go into it. All those parts that I was removing and everything, they did what they could to clamp it together with plastic clips and get this all together with about 18 screws, which, if you remember what the Xbox 360 originally shipped with, which were a ton of screws all over the place, that's pretty impressive, actually. Now, did it run quiet or any of that? Hard to say because the 360S was already pretty quiet, especially over the original Xbox 360, but I just wonder what would have happened in like an alternate timeline if everything they were trying to sell with the Xbox One originally caught on, if the Xbox 360E would have just led to a longer lifespan of the Xbox 360 to go alongside of their always online Xbox One system. But let me know what you guys think about the Xbox 360E, specifically if you did get one, maybe in that second half of the year, maybe at the holiday time when the Xbox One was really difficult to get, you decided to upgrade your Xbox 360. Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.